everyone, Raptorspank here, and today we have Metacheck, June 15th. This is the show where I talk about the meta and some decks I find interesting, and also give an update on my deck from last week's On the Grind. So, first off, real quick mention, not really going to talk too much about the patch because, well, there's no balance changes in it. They told us there wasn't going to be any balance changes. There weren't any balance changes, shocker. But, you know, the Pool Party Champion skin line shows that they're really starting to move more into that whole changing the appearance of your champion, paying extra for that, which, you know, kind of always, well, I always thought that they should, or that they should just save those as, like, regions later on. That if they did, like, sort of a rotating standard kind of thing, they could have, like, say, Demacia rotate out, or, you know, well, I mean, if we're being honest, Targon rotate out and never exist anymore. And then you could have, like, Pool Party region rotate in, or more wise things like Project region, or Star Guardian region, that sort of thing. So, I guess they're going to do more like alternate card arts rather than regions, and that's fine. That makes sense too. So, yeah, that's kind of neat. Skins, I've never been a huge fan of the Pool Party skins. Didn't hate them, but weren't really my kind of thing. Although, these ones are actually pretty sweet. I'll probably have to get the Draven one. The Taliyah one's pretty sick too, with the waves in the background. So, I mean, I might get a couple of them myself. But other than that, let's talk about an update on a Ezreal Draven from last week's On the Grind. So, since recording, I've only played 5 games since then, but I went 4-1, the one loss being against Azir, unfortunately, and the win being against, let's see, it was Ashe, LeBlanc, Thresh Nasus, Renekton Sivir, so kind of all meta stuff except for one Zed Darius Elusives, which is quite a blast from the past. Well, sort of elusive burn, that kind of thing. If people remember the champion Liss, Noxus, Ionia, elusive burn deck, it's basically that, but also with Zed and Darius in there. So that was a really neat deck, although it did not fare particularly well against us. And then Azir was very close, but they kind of had the right stuff at the right time. They had the Nopify for our Scorched Earth on their dais, and that kind of cost us the game, although they did have Marshall, and we didn't have a way to kill it, so that ended up ultimately being the problem. But unfortunate, but still, 80% win rate since we played it last. That's pretty great. Brings the overall to a 67% win rate, so nothing to bat an eye at there. That's 8-4, so deck's doing really good. Obviously, I said I thought that the win rate would come up a bit if I played it a bit more, like, at least it wouldn't be like a one win apart thing, and that proved to be the case. Probably still going to play some Ezreal Draven since it is good right now, so yeah, it's a solid deck. It does reasonably well into the field. Even the bad matchups, you have a chance of winning, although, you know, it's a card game. You can lose any game, you can win any game, so I think we are supposed to be favored into Azir, but I've only run into once and lost once, but as for kind of more general meta thoughts, meta's in a weird spot right now. Azir is really, really strong. Thresh Nasus is really, really strong, but I haven't been seeing them quite as much lately. Probably because everyone's just so sick of playing it and playing against it that they're actually playing other decks, because I have seen a fairly wide variety of decks, particularly aggro. I saw a lot more discard aggro, and then the Zed elusive burn deck that I mentioned, but also Azir Darius. I'm seeing a lot of aggro. Not as much other strategies, other than the Lissandra Taliyah that we saw 2 of for On the Grind. That was interesting. That's a deck I have an eye on myself, too. I feel like it can be very solid, and in fact, we'll talk about it a little bit more later on, but I think that's a deck that has a lot of promise, so that's something I'm interested in myself, and kind of a little bit different, sort of combo-y, control-y sort of deck in the meta, which kind of Ezreal Draven was the closest thing to control we had, so this is even a little more controlling, which is cool, but you're not seeing a lot of that. You're mostly seeing aggro decks, or a couple of weird mid-rangey decks are still popping up as well, but all in all, right now, it just seems like the best decks are still Azir, Thresh Nasus, Ezreal Draven, and maybe Lissandra Taliyah gets in there too, but people are just kind of experimenting a lot, since we're sort of at the end of the season. Seasonal tournaments, I think, this weekend, so the cutoffs this week, so I'm a little surprised we didn't see more meta decks, but it's probably worse at Masters tier than where I'm at right now, but just in general, odd timing. I kind of expect to see a little less of the competitive meta decks towards the end, but then again, some people do grind, try to hit number 1 and all that, so we might see that spike up again, but mostly I think after the seasonal cutoff, I would kind of expect things to get a little less stagnant just out of sheer boredom alone, but that's kind of where we're at right now. As for a couple of decks to talk about this week, I do have a couple in mind. One is an old favorite of mine. I break out this deck every so often and play just because it's really fun. It's a nice synergistic aggro deck, but that is the Nightfall Aggro list. I wanted to kind of mention it because it's changed a little bit since I covered it or played it in on the grind, I believe was the last time I played it, and that was quite a few seasons ago, and it has definitely changed a fair bit since. Solari Sunhawk's kind of a weird include, but it actually is fairly strong, and then the Flight is a great way to turn on Nightfall and be fairly aggressive. It's elusive as well, which elusive is actually pretty good in Nightfall for forcing some damage through, so a lot of value we get out of that. We've gone down Fading Memories, but that's because we have Unto Dusk now, which is really, really strong. The One of Atrocity is something that, you know, I'm always a fan of One of Atrocities. You can always fling something for lethal, surprise your opponent out of nowhere. I was playing some normals with the deck just for fun and to complete a Nightfall mission, and I played Nocturne last, hoping that they would be foolish enough to do this with their double Eclipse Dragon, but they immediately Concerted Striked the Nocturne going down to 1, and they're at 6 health. The Nocturne was leveled up, and I had Atrocity in hand plus mana, and I just flung it at them and punished them for their very, very poor decision making. But I always love it for things like that. It'll steal you games out of nowhere. But we've gone down the Unspeakable Horrors a little bit. We've gone down 1 because it's really not that great into the deck. And as I mentioned, Fading Memories, we have Unto Dusk, which is just kind of better because it draws us a card, but it does kind of do what Fading Memories is there for. The big thing for Fading Memories was essentially to copy a Doom Beast and then play it to get another Drain trigger. Well, Unto Dusk does that as well, as long as we can trigger Nightfall on it, which we can do very easily, especially with things like the Flight in here now. And Solari Sunhawk's a nice way to buy us time while also triggering Nightfall too. So it's just a super aggressive deck, very fun. I do highly recommend it, especially for people who like more synergistic aggro decks where you're kind of having to think about your plays a little bit more rather than just curving out perfectly and swinging a bunch. So this is just a really fun deck. I love it. I've played it a lot. If you like, you can I'll include the link up above to the old Nightfall deck guide I did a couple seasons ago. That gives you kind of a good idea of how to play the deck in general, but the changes that have happened to the deck don't really change the overall play of or play style of the deck, let's say. So that's pretty much the same. You just have a couple of neat new tricks. But I did mention that we were going to talk about it, so let's talk about Lissandra Taliyah, one of the more interesting decks to appear in the meta right now. This has kind of been popping in and out since Shurima dropped. People trying to do the sort of turbo thrall list, which is what this is, except it's kind of tweaked a little more control now too, so it can hold up into the current metagame. But the idea here is to get your thralls out as quick as possible. I mean, you'd love to level up a Lissandra, slam a Watcher, and kill your opponent with that too, but that's not the focal point of this deck, like it is in the Spectral Matron control deck. This one is really about playing thralls and basically flipping them as soon as possible or making them flip multiple times with Promising Future. You can make that one thrall tick down and give you 2 8/8s with trample, and that becomes a really big problematic board state for most other decks. There's not a lot of Shadow Isles going around right now, especially ones that have the Ruination in them. So there's not a lot of decks that can answer a board full of 8/8s. So that's kind of the idea here, is that we're just being a control deck while trying to get our thralls down to 8. We get them low, we copy them with Taliyah, we can use things like Time in a Bottle or Clockwork Curator to just try and speed up the process. Succumb to Cold is kind of... So there's a number of variants I've seen of this deck. Some people run Flash Freeze. I'm running Succumb to the Cold instead right now because it costs 1 extra mana, but it gives you a Thrall too, which kind of works towards the plan of the deck. And then I like the One of Harsh Winds. And Buried in Ice, I've seen a lot of people running it, so I'm giving it a try. I'm not wholly convinced on this, but it does kind of work like a Ruination, since it's going to basically fog for 2 turns. So that's really, really strong for stopping a crazy swing out of your opponent and buying yourself enough time to combo them out. So that's really good. Obviously, Draculorn's here to speed up our... same with Clockhand as well, but speed up our Thrall plan. We've got Preservarium just for good card draw. Blighted Ravine is a board wipe. Avalanche board wipe. Ice Shard board wipe. I like the one of Rite of Negation too, because there are a number of Atrocity decks out there right now, so it's a nice way to answer it. Although... reasonably speaking, you don't necessarily need to have Right to deal with Atrocity, because it's much better to, say, Succumb, Harsh Winds, Flash Freeze them so that they still lose their creature and you don't take damage, but that's not always going to work. If they can flip Anasis and then so he's level up and has Spell Shield, then that's not really going to be as easy to do. It's still possible, but you're going to need two things. One to strip Spell Shield, one to Frostbite him, so I kind of like having that catch-all Rite of Negation for basically having an answer for any deck we can run into. But generally speaking, this is a control deck. You're going to sort of be working towards your plan, but you're also going to be looking to trade with your opponent's stuff or just remove it straight up. We don't have a ton of removal per se, but we do have some decent ones. So you're just looking for that. Try to buy yourself time. Even just Frostbiting's fine, because our late game is better than most other decks, so just buying time can actually be enough often. So really sweet deck, really neat. Definitely gonna play it a little bit more myself, so I do highly recommend it for people looking for something a little bit different. It seems to be doing reasonably well in the metagame right now. It's not quite as dominant as like Azir Aurelia or Thresh Nasus is, but I think it's actually got a chance to hold its own in the meta, so it's definitely something I've got an eye on, and I'm considering playing a lot more of it, so we'll see about that. And if you like either one of these decks, there is a deck link in the description below for both of them. And if you enjoy the video, you can always leave a like, comment below, and subscribe for more Legends of Runeterra content.